All right. Good morning. Good morning. I want to thank you, first of all, for being present. I don't really need a microphone. I have a Barry White voice, so I use my Pee Wee Herman voice. So anyway, I want to thank you, first of all, for being here today. I thank Microsoft for the opportunity to present to you. In previous years, did a session called Case Studies, so I see some of the same faces. And this year, because migration is a big issue, well, not necessarily an issue, but a big topic, I decided to focus on migration. That being said, fortunately, at this point, there are not a lot of migration issues, right? So the product just went RTM, so I want to make sure. So when you see the common blockers, don't put a negative connotation to it. It's not really negative. It's really just something to stop you for a moment, to take a pause before you move forward. And that being said, I do want to tell you that, as I've said in the past, for those who have been here or you haven't been into this session, it's an aggressive session. I do cover a lot of information. It's impossible to cover every single question in an hour. I was sitting at the PFE booth the other day, yesterday, and some of the other configuration manager booths, and some of the questions averaged 30 minutes. Were y'all standing in those lines where the questions averaged 30 minutes? Well, some of those questions averaged 30 minutes. So there'll be opportunities for follow discussion. Today, if you want to talk to me in the Microsoft Pavilion, in the PFE Premier Field Engineering, I'll be available at 12:45 to 1:15, and then at 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. in the social area for follow-up. In addition, I don't need to tell you this, that your evaluations are really important, so please fill those out. And again, the assumption here is that you're new to Config Manager 2012, you have not deployed it yet, or you're maybe not in the TAP program, so some of this was geared to that, but hopefully that it will address most of the people in the room. How many people attended the Configuration Manager Plan Deploy Migration from? Okay, so that's most of the room. So there may be a couple things that are similar. There are some reminders from that session. Eric Orman asked me to reiterate a couple things, just as bring some points home. So again, this is not a session on troubleshooting. As I said, this is kind of geared for those who were not in the TAP program. So if you're in the TAP program, how many people are in the TAP program? Raise your hand. So that's a small percentage in the room. Awesome. How many people are new to Configuration Manager? So, okay, there's 3. So I do have one issue in here that may affect you, so I may not spend a lot of time on that, because the majority of people in the room are currently running Configuration Manager 2007 SP2R3. Raise your hand. Woo! Yes. All right, that's good. Love it. And so that being said, a lot of these issues were some of this came from TAP customers, some came from the product group, some of the issues came from testing in a lab. So as you know, the product just went RTM, so we don't have 12 months of data to give you as far as issues are concerned. But I did put some stuff together that I think will be important. I do have to give you this branding notice that the name of the product is System Center 2012 Configuration Manager. You're going to have a quiz on that. Everybody remember that? All right, so for the purpose of the presentation, I'm going to abbreviate. Is that okay? All right, awesome. Whew. That was the hardest part of the session. So session objectives, migration basics. For those who just came into the room, I am going to cover some basics in the beginning, and then I'm going to get into some of the migration blockers. Okay, so bear with me. Some of the stuff, if you already know, I will get to some other things, and then a summary. Provide information that will help you avoid and isolate any potential issues. So that's the purpose of this, and to avoid downtime. The basic things for any upgrade, and this is not an upgrade, right? This is a migration. For any migration or any installation is making sure that you have all your ducks in a row. Eric did a great job of talking about all the things that you need to prepare for, but again, I'm just kind of bringing the point home how important hardware configuration is, SQL Server configuration, data gathering, ports required, and some other requirements. And one of the things that I did in this session is that I'm providing you the information so when you have to go to your decision makers at your company and say, here's what we need, here's what Microsoft has stated we need, you can just lay it out and not think about it. So the first thing is not having the proper hardware specs will be a migration nightmare. Anybody agree with that? Raise your hand if you agree. I love virtual machines. Virtual machines are great. They can handle a lot of things, but some things you can't virtualize. Some things you can't sacrifice on, right? For somebody in the room, you bought a really cheap ring for your wife, and she's still making you pay for it today, right? Right. She reminds you like 20 years later, yeah, I got this ring out of the bubblegum machine. But you're still married, so that's really the most important thing. So do not sacrifice. Disk I/O, available memory, CPU, you don't want to sacrifice. And just to give you an idea, I went out and bought an expander drive. I bought an Adaptec personally. I bought an Adaptec controller. One of my friends here, Don Brown in the back, I pick at him. He tells me I should have got a server because I got a hyped up desktop. But nonetheless, I put that in my machine, and I put my drives, my virtual machines on that external controller, and boy, it's fast. I mean, it's like going from a Ford Escort to a Mercedes. And that's the difference. That's the different experience you'll have. So make sure you don't sacrifice that. I didn't have time. I didn't want to put all the screenshots in here, but I do want to say this. Has anybody seen this blog from Microsoft IT? One person. It was just posted like within the last week or so. And basically, it lays out with screenshots and a lot of detail. Am I right about that? Yeah, see, guys shaking his head. A lot of detail on what you need to do to prepare your environment for hardware configuration and SQL configuration. It's really good. So I figured that I would put that in here as a reference for you. That being said, SQL is a memory hog. Am I right? I mean, SQL is time-consuming. It's like I pick at the guys, so I'm gonna tell the ladies in the room. It's like that guy who won't keep calling you, who keeps calling you all the time. He just won't stop calling you, won't stop bugging you. That's what SQL. It's constantly trying to grab memory. So there are two things you need to know. If SQL's on the same box as the server, you want to limit your memory 50 to 80%. Now that may be that's subjective depending on your environment, but 50 to 80% is where you want to start. If the box is dedicated, in other words, it's a remote SQL server, you can limit the memory up to 80 to 90%. And that's based on our testing. That's based on 100,000 plus machines. More than that, really, but that's just a basis for you to start, and that's all documented. That's all documented. So I didn't make that number up. I didn't pull it out of my back pocket. So how many people have seen this who have installed this? It does not lie. This is extremely important. And so what you see there, if you can see that, it require a minimum of 8 gigs for SQL. Just so you know, require a minimum of that. So data gathering requirements. It's really important that, this is a review, that you have read permissions to all source objects, read and execute for the SQL Server account. In this case, so when you set up your source in 2012, you want to make sure that on 2007 you have the right permissions. And then you also can validate your SQL connection when you go in and put that account in. Want to make sure you do that. That's critical. So I've only taken 5 minutes, so I'm zooming through this really fast. The other thing is ports. These ports are really important. 445, 135, 1433. These are ports that you're going to need for the data gathering process. Apologize for the space. I don't do the formatting, but nonetheless, those are some ports that you need. These are important. All right. Eric wanted me to bring this point home for those who were in the migration session on yesterday. He said that one of the questions that came up was about setting up your top-level site for source gathering. Think of it like this. If you have, so in the left panel, you have your 2007 environment. On the right side, you have your 2012 environment. So basically, when you set up the first source, generally it's your central site server, and you migrate the objects over. You have to set up a migration source for each primary site. So next, it would be, in this case, EMEA, PS, USA. So you would have different source set up for each one of those primary sites. And then you would have to create migration jobs for those sources. Because I think that he got a lot of questions yesterday on that topic. And so if you have other objects that you want to migrate over from those other sites, that's what you would have to do. That makes sense, everyone? Yes? No? Fog? Okay, cool. All right. The other requirement that that we mentioned in our documentation is that if you want your software update data to migrate over, you have to set up a software update point ahead of time. You have to synchronize it. You have to make sure, deploy and active. You have to synchronize it. The other point is if you're using SCUP, we don't migrate SCUP, so that's just an FYI. And then the most important part is that the catalog of both products and language must match. So if these two things don't match, then you're going to have issues when you migrate. That's going to be a blocker. So don't overlook that. That's a really small thing, but it's a really easy thing to overlook. So don't overlook that. So again, these are just the basics. Migration blockers. You don't have to raise your hand. You can just blink at me. I got a question for you. How many people ever ran a red light? Okay. All right. I have an officer in the back of the room who wants to see you afterwards. But no, seriously. I take my, or even every day, think of migration blockers like this. Every day I take my kid to school, and every day there's a neighborhood that I go through to make a shortcut, and there's a stop sign. And I know the stop sign's there because I've been doing this every single day. But how many times do you think I've actually came to a complete stop? 0. Because you roll up to the stop sign, you take a quick look before you even get there, and you keep going, right? You don't stop. And until they start giving out tickets, then you stop. So I guess my point is, when I say migration blockers, I don't want you to think of it in a negative way. I want you to think of it as just taking a moment to stop, because we're coming from, all of us I've been supporting this product since SMS 1.2. This is the biggest change in the history of our product. Am I right? This is a significant change. And so my mindset is still 1.2, 2.0, 2003, and 2007. I have customers, and my customers are, okay, I got permission. I got a customer, I won't say the name, that's still using ITMU in the 2007 environment. They're still using a lot of MOF. There's a lot of updates to the MOF file. Yeah, am I familiar? There's another group that wants you to inventory something. So what first thing they say, update the MOF. So we're bringing all these old processes with us when we come to 2012. And so we have to take a step back. We have to stop and say, wait a minute, this is a completely different way of doing things, especially collections, right? And so that's why I call that migration blockers. Again, so here are some of the things that we'll talk about. I have 60 minutes. I think we can do this. Adjusting to how you manage collections and Configuration Manager 2012. Eric did a really good job of diving into that, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. Unknown computer collection does not migrate. I'll tell you why. Tell you why it doesn't migrate. We already have one, but I'll tell you why. What about your App V applications? How many people using App V? Oh, awesome, awesome. Content not converted during DP upgrade of a branch distribution point. How many people have branches DPs? A few. I've worked with customers who have 5,400 branch DPs. So I've worked with customers who have 3,000 branch DPs. So you can imagine that's important. Secondary site share DPs are not eligible for upgrade. Service share. Shared DP eligibility upgrade guide. And then cannot distribute content to shared DPs. I'll tell you what scenario that exists in. Enabling DP sharing fails with timeout errors. DP upgrade of secondary site does not remove R2, R3. Shared distribution point notes, NetBIOS name and domain, fully qualified domain name. Failure to set up SQL unique instances. How many people are going to set up multiple instances on a SQL box? So we got at least one, and others may want to consider it. So, and then secondary site install on different drive fails. And then number 14 is really for those who haven't deployed a client for Config Manager. So you don't have a client on the machine, so then you would have an issue. And then migrating clients to Configuration Manager 2012 site, managing the machines in the same boundary. How many people may have that scenario? Right? So that may be a scenario. And then setting up permissions for SRS. Now, I want to do a quick survey because this is really important to me. Out of all those issues, I forgot. Oh, gee, I didn't realize I had that many. So then there's, no, I'm just joking. SMS def mod file, Pixie cache expired value not available by default, and then client Pixie boot fails. Out of those 20, how many people see something in there that you want to hear about? Okay, Rock. Okay, that's great. All right, so, I just want to make sure. It's very difficult to plan for this session because I have no way of surveying you before I get here. So I'm only giving you what I've been able to discover up to this point. That being said, attempting to transfer old collection management process from Config Manager 2007 to 2012, not leveraging targeting global conditions. I've been in environments where they had 6,000 collections. Anybody have 6,000 collections? No, you don't have to. No? Okay. And more than that, because collections were used, as we were reminded, to manage machines. But now we do a lot more than that. Now we can leverage approvals, rules and conditions, include versus exclude collections. So we don't have to create all these other collections to make this work. So just for brevity and time, I was going to demo this, but I decided just to give you a couple screenshots here. So has anybody played with this exclude, include yet? No? Okay. So here's what you do. You go into, you right-click on the collection, and you go in and you say, well, I want to exclude a collection or include a collection. So when you do that, it pulls up this screen. Then you can actually select. So for example, I think I selected, in this case, where you see CM all approved workstations to be migrated. That was one of my collections. I ran a migration job last night, and that was one that replicated over. And so I can include that if I want to in a collection. Instead of writing all these complex queries, it does it for me. And so it makes my job really easy. And then I can actually, I can add a query rule as well. And so I can do a direct rule, a query rule. So I go into the option, and I select, just right-click, say add. In this case, I call sample include query, and it basically just points to the query that's already listed, the query you already wrote. So it makes it really easy. And then this is the result. When you go back, hit OK, apply, you come back and you can see everything that's attached to. When you right-click on that collection, you can see everything that's attached to that collection. And so that makes life a little easier, right? I mean, that just makes it. Everyone like that? Does that seem easy? Cool? Okay, awesome. Another thing I want to bring up is unknown computer collection does not migrate. So the reason that this doesn't happen is because Configuration 2012 identifies the unknown computer collection as a mixed collection with users and devices. So because it reads it that way, we don't migrate it over. So what happens is that because we detect it incorrectly, we don't have all those associated advertisement and task sequences that have been assigned to that collection. And so the solution for that is to identify the advertisements that are targeted to the collection, identify the task sequences and the packages configured for it, and then go in and create a migration job and select those objects. And after the migration job is completed, you can recreate the advertisement by creating software deployment, then reassigning it to the all unknown computer collection. And so that note's in there, but that's not publicly documented. So has anybody in the TAP program experienced that? Nope, because I don't think we only have a few in here. Another issue that pops up is app V application. Customer has a fully integrated app V environment with a lot of app V applications. I think in this example, there might have been 200 app V applications. After migrating those applications, customer had some difficulties with changing the source path for deployment. And locating the manifest for where it was located. So let me just tell you some other things. So before we get into that, there's some things that you should know before you migrate. You got to ensure that the 64-bit clients have AppV version 4.6 and higher. How many people have that have AppV now? Okay, so that's not as many, because before I asked how many people run in AppV, so I had more hands up. So make sure you get to, for the 64-bit clients if you have them, AppV 4.6. And then we use classic software distribution programs are really no longer supported with AppV. Instead, we use the application model. So what happens, here's a screenshot of my 2007 lab. So in my 2007 lab, when you have that nice little icon beside it, when you go into the actual package properties, you'll see virtual application, and it lists the virtual application for you with the version. When we migrate that over, you go into the application model, and it's listed there. So then we convert it to the application model. So now you got to create a deployment. What happened in this case is when he tried to go find the source for it, he could not find the manifest source, so he had to update the content to do that. So if you have 100 AppV applications, you're going to have to update the content in order for it to update the manifest source for the AppV. And so that's not intuitive, but it's definitely that is the solution. And so once he did that, he was able to deploy it. Another, well, first of all, does that make sense to everyone? Yep, that's clear? Nope. Smoky? All right. So a few. So I tell you what, if you have any other questions about that, see me afterwards, and we can go into more detail on it, and I'll come back to it. So think of it like this. Let me see if I can get here to my server. Let's see if I let me in here. Let's see here. Not that one. Cross my fingers. Let's see. My example, I've already migrated it, but when he went into, this is my AppV app. This is so when he went in here, see, I already created this, but when I went in to create the deployment before, I can't show you now. I've already deployed it, but I can show you where it was. So what happens here, let me just bring this up. I had to select this and then validate or redistribute in order to get that to update. That's all I had to do. So if you're having issues creating your deployment, you just go into the properties of the app V and just update it there. So it's pretty straightforward, but it definitely was a blocker for some people. Another potential issue that you may see is that we do convert branch distribution points, and I was talking to a customer yesterday, and on their branch DPs, they use service shares, so we will convert to service share. But there is a challenge if the 2007 client is not uninstalled. Even if you uninstall the 2007 client from the branch distribution point, we still will retain the content. So if you don't do it ahead of time and then we go to try to migrate that distribution point to 2007, then some of the content won't migrate because the 2007 client tries to modify the data when we're trying to migrate. It's trying to hold on to that content. So you have to uninstall the client on your branch distribution points. All right, this section is called DP shared and upgrade migration blockers. So just as a review, sharing distribution points, when you share a distribution point, the whole goal of sharing a distribution point is to allow you, it's a temporary solution. So you can migrate, so as you migrate your 2007 clients to 2012, you can access that data. You can access the data. The 2012 clients can also access the current data from 2007. And so what you might see here, so here we go. First migration blocker is secondary site with a service share DP is not eligible. I think we surveyed about 15 TAP customers, and there was maybe 3 customers that had that issue. So if you have a secondary site and you have a service share on the secondary site, it will not be eligible for the upgrade. So the way you think about it, secondary site plus service share is not eligible for an upgrade. And so when you do make that attempt, here's what you'll see. You'll see these error messages. It's pretty clear in the migration log. It'll tell you that detected secondary site is installed. It'll say detected another site is installed on this. It'll say another site system is installed on the server. So if you have 2 site systems that it detects, we can't upgrade. Same thing applies if you're trying to upgrade a distribution point, it's not a secondary site, to a 2012 DP. If you have 2 site system roles, say a Pixie Point, or if any other site system roles, Pixie Points and an MP, you have to uninstall those roles. Does that make sense? Okay. So, excuse my graph, but I had to block out customer data, some of it anyway. And so you can see, all they just went in the UI, you can see that, hey, that was our issue. And so the solution there is to remove the service share DP, add a standard DP, then this removes a duplicate site system role, and the DB becomes eligible for an upgrade. And that solves the problem. So here's kind of a cheat sheet of what this would look like. Service share plus secondary site, eligible for upgrade, no. Service share remote, so here's the difference. If you have a service share on a remote server, then it is eligible for an upgrade. And then shared standard DP and protected DPs are all eligible for upgrade. So those are non-issues. Another misconception during the migration process is that you could go into 2012 and create content in 2012 and make it available on 2007 shared DPs. You cannot do that. So you can't go into 2012 and create content and put it on 2007 distribution points. That's not allowed. We can use a shared distribution point, which is by definition a 2007 site, and allow 2012 and 2007 clients to access it. because we're converting the data and we're leveraging that, but we can't do it the other way around. So this customer, the other issue the challenge they had, they were not eligible for upgrades anyway because they were still on Windows 2003 SP2. So they couldn't upgrade, so they had to keep both hierarchies around for a while until they were able to upgrade. So in their cases, they just created all their packages in 2007 until they were able to upgrade their 2000, because the benefit there is that your 2012 clients can still access the data on the 2007 shared DPs. So that makes sense from infrastructure, from a planning standpoint? The other way around, you limit yourself. So they did have, well, it's not even limit, it's just not an option. One other issue that keeps popping up, this is just a quick tip. This is one slide. When you enable DP sharing, the migration job may fail with COM timeout errors, and that's basically because you don't have enough memory for WMI. So there's not enough memory from WMI. And there's another issue I didn't really put in the slide that was related to DCM as I was thinking about this, is that if there's spaces in the DCM template, they don't always migrate as well when you migrate over. So this is just an FYI that if you don't attach enough memory to WMI, and that's on the 2007 site, then it may not migrate. You may have some error messages. All right, DP upgrade of secondary sites does not remove R2. How many people have R2, R3 on secondary sites? All right, so that's about a third of the room. And bottom line there is, have you ever had an issue with WSUS installs? No? Everybody's WSUS install has been perfect. Let me rephrase that. Have you ever had an issue with an MS installer file that you couldn't uninstall? Yes, everybody's had that issue. You remember the MS Zap utility? Anybody know that one? Okay, so I'm trying to give you some advice. If you don't remove R2, R3 beforehand, then you're going to have to manually remove this. So if you decide that, okay, I'm going to upgrade this secondary site and forget to take R2, R3 off the site, then you're going to have to manually remove it or get lucky because we don't even publish the MS Zap utility. It might be out there somewhere on the internet, I'm sure. But we have the utility called Fix-It utility. Anybody familiar with that? Yeah, so just an FYI, you have to manually clean it up. So just a summary. Shared DPs are available both to 2007 and 2012 clients. 2007 and 2012 clients must use the same port. To be shared DP, it must be configured as a fully qualified domain name. Must be configured as that. 2012 creates a boundary group for shared protected DPs. So when you upgrade, it will create a boundary group. So that's. Then the other thing is package versions must remain consistent between the two sites. So make sure that you're not updating that. And we can't host app-v shared packages on shared DPs. So you got to migrate those over. Now, site system blockers. All right, well, before I do that, was that section pretty clear? No? Okay, good. We're out of the mud. Great. All right, so let you digest that for a minute. What are you saying? How many people migrated from NT4 domain? Wow, so most people hopefully shouldn't have this issue. But it is a support statement, and I just wanted to bring it up. And it's definitely, it worked in 2007. Some environments were able to get by without this, but here's what we're saying. That if the NetBIOS name does not match the first label of the fully qualified domain name, that's not supported in 2012. So in this example, MMS is the NetBIOS name. MMS1 is the first label of the fully qualified domain name. That may work in some environment. I'm not saying it may not work, but it's not supported. The support statement says it's not supported. Here's what is supported. The first label of the fully qualified domain name. First label of the fully qualified domain name. So before you deploy your environment, I wouldn't be up here telling you this if I wasn't sure that wasn't our support statement, because I got some of those looks. Don't beat the, don't push, I'm just a messenger. Don't kill me, all right? And if you have some questions afterwards, I definitely follow up with that afterwards. So one answer was create a new domain with the correct net BIOS, fully qualified domain name, and manage the resources in a fully trusted domain. Now, I know that's not necessarily easy, but I'm just the messenger. All right? That could change, but as of today, that is the statement. All right, so here's, let me go to my machine here and show you this. So go back. Actually, let's talk about this. Failure to set up SQL unique instances. So in this case, customer has a SQL database, and they want to set up 2 SQL instances for this on this remote SQL database. And so they make an attempt to do this. They want one for the CAS and the primary site. And we don't support dynamic ports in Configuration Manager. That's not supported. So we have to make some modifications. We have to make the port static. So we go in, we make the port static per the instructions, and we get this error message. Bam. And it looks like that the account's not set up. It looks like we have a correlation issue. It looks like that the account, all the things that we should be checking, it looks like it's just simple. Should be easy to resolve. So we check to see if the SQL browser service is running. Both instances are running as domain accounts with the SPN configured. Then we go online and check. Let's check all the SQL documentation and see what it says. And so it gives us some descriptions of what we need to do. So here's what we need to do. So let's go here. So wherever the dynamic port for SQL is set for 0, if it's listed on 0, that implies that we need to make that, we need to clear that 0 out and make it blank. So let me see. Let's close this. Go into SQL Tools here. Configuration Tools is where you want to go. SQL Server Configuration Manager. And cross my fingers and hope it stays. Let's see. It's come. Oh, yay. Woohoo. It's up. And so let's go in here. SQL Server Network Configuration Protocols. You want to go to TCP. Now remember, we don't support dynamic ports in Configuration Manager. So in order to make those ports static, we have to go to IP addresses. And wherever you see dynamic port, I took it out already, but if it was listening on 0, you clear it out. You clear that value out. So IP dynamic port here, and that's what our directions tell us to do, the SQL directions here. So it's IP, any of that needs to be 0. In the customer's case, what happened here, the reason this failed, is because we're following the instructions for SQL. And it just wasn't intuitive to us. Doesn't mean it was wrong. It just wasn't intuitive. And so we discovered that, that the IP all TCP dynamic port had a value other than 0. So it was ignored because it told us that wherever 0 is listening, that port is active. So we basically didn't modify that port. So what ended up happening there is that it had a value in it, and that value was left there. As soon as we removed that value, the issue was resolved. So that's how we solve the TCP dynamic port issue. That make sense? Everybody clear? Okay. Another challenge that comes up is secondary sites. How many people at this point, how many people have more than 10 secondary sites? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people have less than 5 secondary sites? Okay, so means that that's about half the room. So you may still use secondary sites in some cases. I would say that, you know, with the way we manage content now, that there are probably very few cases where you need as many secondary sites. But if you do have a secondary site, you probably don't want to install Configuration Manager on a C drive, do you? No. And so here's it's a system drive. So here's a very simple thing. When we deploy a secondary site, we do install SQL Express. And so in this case, the customer pre-installed SQL. And after pre-installed SQL, and they went to try to install the secondary site, they got these error messages: permission and correlation issues. So they went through and said, well, let's check to make sure the account that's installing has sysadmin rights on the target box. And we checked that, and next thing we know, the account we were using had the appropriate rights. So then there was no correlation issues. So the issue was really simple, that when you select the option, even though it's a local install of SQL, you have to select use an existing SQL Server instance. And that resolved the issue. So it seems like a very simple thing, but it's easy to overlook. Client migration blockers. Again, this is for those who haven't deployed Configuration Manager, or maybe you have a site out there that does not have SCCM 2007 on it. If it's a 2003 SP2 server, then you need to deploy the SCCM client if you're already in the SCCM environment. So that solves your issue for this issue. If you don't have it, if you haven't a Configuration Manager deployed, again, this is really simple. We require bits 2.5 and higher. Think of it like this: when we could deploy Configuration Manager 2012, most operating systems already have bits 2.5 and higher, so it was really a non-issue. But in this particular case, it doesn't have it. Or if you did have SP3, SP2, you already had the SCCM client, which installed bits 2.5 and higher. This is a case where the client's not installed or you haven't deployed it yet. In that particular instance, what you want to do is deploy it prior to that. And of course, you can use WSUS to push it. And that may not be the best method in some environments, so you can use PSExec. There are all other types of environments. Again, there are very few people in this room that probably will experience that, but I'm sharing it with you. Another question that keeps popping up is, what's the best way to migrate clients? Customer would like to migrate clients in 2007 and 2012. We don't really support 2007 clients reporting to a 2012 hierarchy. So how do we handle that? Option A is to upgrade clients by pushing the binaries from a 2007 site. You can do that. And then do a site reassignment. That's option A. That's option A. Another option is to invoke an AD system discovery to find the 2007 sites. And what's great about AD system discovery now is that you can exclude stale records. And so you can find those sites, and then you can do a push install to those clients from Config Manager 2012, which I kind of like that approach. So those are the two options. Does that sound like, which option you like, A or B? A, raise your hand. B? Woo, yeah, I like that too. Awesome. So we're there. All right, so another concern is, how do you manage the clients in two boundaries? So there are going to be situations where you want to go to 2012, but you can't get there right away. And you still have to maintain your 2007 environment for a whole lot of different reasons. You know, custom apps or whatever, or you're migrating to OS. And so you still have to migrate two environments at the same time. And you're put in a situation where you have to share boundaries. And so we don't want the 2007 client reporting to the 2012 site because it's really not supported. And there's the danger of that client getting assigned to a 2012 site. And if it gets assigned to a 2012 site, you're pretty much hosed there. So what do you do? Well, the good thing is the 2012 clients won't be impacted by 2007. So the focus is really the 2007 client that we have to figure out a solution for. The best solution there came from one of my colleagues, which is a great idea, is that what you can do is that because we don't use an SLP in 2012, you can add that parameter for new installs of 2007 clients to your installations. Because remember, this is only an issue for site assignment. It won't be an issue for content location, because 2012 and 2007 handles content location differently. So that's how you address that blocker. It's kind of a loophole, but it works. So that's one option for you. If you have some other options, I'd love to hear it. The other option is don't have overlapping boundaries, right? But in some cases, that's not the answer, or that's not the solution for a lot of customers. All right, so how many people have worked with SRS reports? Awesome. So if you're like a lot of configuration manager admins that I talk to, many have other groups that handle the SRS reporting. Am I right? Because that's all they do. They don't know anything about configuration manager, right? They just know reporting. They were hired reporting. I went to a customer and they were using Excel for reporting, and they were really, really good at it. And it was really complicated. And so they were exporting all their queries and they were putting it in Excel. And I was like, why are you doing that? But that's what they were doing. And but there's some people, that's all they know. So here you are, the configuration manager guy. Now you're going into the SRS world. And maybe you didn't have it before. Maybe you had a little bit of flavor of it. But it's so much easier now. And so that's a question that comes up, setting up permissions. Customers trying to determine the minimum rights for user security groups and access in SRS and to create new reports. And so there are really two options. So what happens, and I can show you in my lab, when you install SQL and you say install the SRS reporting, basically everything that you need is there. You know that. But when you enable the reporting service point, it creates these groups for you in the SRS reports. So what happens is, in order to give users permissions, we pretty much use these two groups. So here's the first thing you can do. You got to determine what role your user is going to have, right? So if your user has read permissions, when you go into the admin console, there's going to be there's several types of roles and security roles. And in order to do reporting, you either got to have modify report or read. So you got to have those two options. In this particular case, in my lab, I use administrators, application administrators, and that's how I validated properties. And then if you go into SRS reports, he pulls up, blah, 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 server name, in this case, NYC CAS. And then when I go in here, I can actually see those two groups. And interesting enough, when I added my user Alan to one of my security roles, it automatically added it to the SRS report for me, to that group. So if I go back here, that user only has read permissions. So when I gave them read permissions within security roles. Really easy. I didn't have to do a whole lot of work. And basically, I went in here just to validate the user showed up. And that was it. So let me just see and show you what the user is. Go with VGA. Let's see here. Close this out. Go to my CAS. Got quite a few more issues, so bear with me. Minimize that. Administration, security roles, administrative users. And so I gave my user Alan read-only analyst. And so if you go look at that security role and you right-click on properties, if I can get it up, here you go. Permissions, applications, and they have read and run report. It's already there for you. So it's pretty straightforward. Another issue that popped up during this process was Pixie OSD migration blockers. So anyone remember the cache expire setting in Pixie server? By default, that setting wasn't available. You couldn't modify it until SP2, right? Am I right? You couldn't modify it to SP2. Well, we discovered that when we install 2012, that option is not there by default because we integrate with the distribution point. And so it just wasn't there. And so customer discovered that, and we were troubleshooting it, and found out that, it doesn't exist. Remember, we integrate with the DP, so what you have to do is that you have to go to this registry key and add cache expire to let you modify that setting. And so there should be a blog on that eventually, or I may blog on it and give you a whole lot more detail with the logs, but what I discovered is that's you got to have that registry value there. So let me see. So what's cool about that is it actually deals with the next issue that we discovered. So one of the things that when you enable the distribution point, when you enable the Pixie, so if you have a distribution point and you have a Pixie on it, what you'll find out is that we installed WDS for you. So if you've already installed WDS, that creates a problem because now what happens is it's listening on a different provider. So when you go Pixie boot, you actually will fail. You won't get a response from the DHCP server. Let's bring this up. So that's actually the next issue. So a customer was trying to Pixie boot, and obviously how many people have seen this screen before? Yeah, hate when you see that, right? It's just waiting because we're listening for a different provider, so it just doesn't work. And so obviously the solution was to uninstall WDS, disable the Pixie, and then re-enable it. And then that pretty much solved the problem. You can actually see in the log, I know I saw this in RTM, that I had pre-installed WDS and then I went to install it. You see that it fails in the distribution distribution manager, you see it fails. Then you open up the log and you actually see it tries to re-enable it again. So, but it still had issues listening on the right provider. So we had to uninstall it. And so I went a little fast there, but one of the things I want to make sure is that, again, you can contact PFE today. I'll be in the Microsoft Pavilion, have a lot of questions on some of the stuff we talked about. If there's some things I didn't cover that you want to talk about, please come talk to me afterwards. We have I'm leaving about 15 minutes so we can have those conversations. Please walk up. I have some other colleagues in here from Microsoft that I appreciate that may walk up to actually answer some additional questions as well. The other thing I want to tell you is to complete your evaluation and then access this to view this session, kind of go through this. And then here's some other opportunities. How many people have had health checks for PF? Health checks, did you find it? You won't hurt my feelings, did you find it valuable? Okay, all right. So we do have some other services that you should consider. Here are some of the other PFE engineers that are presenting that may be able to provide some decent information. And then I want to thank all these people for their participation and contribution to this session. And that being said, at this time, I want to thank you for your time. So you stayed awake. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you.